Test, 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 test. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Testing, testing. Somebody's going to introduce me, I understand.
Is it kosher? Kosher?
Almost kosher.
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 Like two sherries. Like
Okay.
kosher.
Kosher.
But anything you do is fine. I've
Okay.
been pronounced many ways. I go by Tim.
Okay. Is that how you want me to introduce you, or? Yeah. Okay. No, I do.
I'd rather have that, but
Yeah.
if they want to be spread out sometimes they might.
Well, I can invite them to the chance.
Some good productions going on.
We do. We just closed one yesterday. We did Shakespeare. Now we're working on Dracula ballet. So, somebody said they were doing 25 days. Well, let's not put it that way.
Yeah, that's pretty tight. Yeah.
Technically, we've got.
I know Casey pretty well over at LCCC.
Oh yeah.
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 He's a good guy.
He's a good
He does a lot with what he got, which isn't very much.
Yeah, it's limited.
Yeah. He does a great job.
Right, so go ahead and get started.
All right.
So I'll take that from you. Okay, feel free to come down closer if you wish. If you're comfortable where you're at, that's fine too, but we've got plenty of space down here. With us today we have Dr. Tim Koshery, and he's going to talk with you hybridizing the learning experience. So I'll give the microphone to him, and he's the real show, okay?
Thank you very much. Yeah, and I go by Tim because my last name is almost always impossible for people to pronounce, but it is pronounced Koshery. And I will be talking to you today about hybridizing the learning experience. One of the things I want to qualify is that hybrid, when I talk about hybrid or I talk about blended, I mean those as being synonymous, all right? I mean, I think both terms are being used out there. I'm more familiar with using the term blended from where I've come from in the past, but they're both going to mean the same thing. And one of the things that this presentation is really about is some course design considerations, all right? It's not going to provide all the answers to what's going to be the best thing to do in your hybrid courses, but it's going to look at some of those considerations, hopefully, and some of the challenges you have with creating hybrid instruction. So I'll go through a number of these things, and please don't hesitate to ask questions or join in. Some of you that have some other comments about this would be welcome. So what is hybrid learning? Well, it's the combination of face-to-face and online. And generally speaking, many institutions have different ways of looking at that. I like to tend to sort of look at it being about this sort of 30 to 70%, but that depends on the different institutions. What we've seen that isn't as effective, which some people do, is they tend to have their hybrid learning being like everybody's coming to class for the first 6 weeks, and then they don't come to class for 6 weeks, and then they come back to class for 3 weeks. And that doesn't seem to be as successful as really making sort of hybrid online, face-to-face sort of shuffle, if you would, going on in a continuum. I mean, you might decide that you want to have a couple of weeks of one way or the other. There's a lot of openness there depending on your institution. I come from a past institution in Minnesota where we had very strict guidelines because we were finding people were all over the board with what they were doing with a hybrid class, and the students had no idea what they were signing up for. And it typically does, one of the advantages can be to reduce seat time if you run into classroom constrictions. The problem I've seen with that is the reality of that is also very difficult because you really have to synchronize between the classroom demands and when you're going to have your face-to-face. Does that make sense? You have to be really working with the scheduling folks, and you could, in fact, if you're working really together, help sort of, promote more classroom space for others. So why hybrid learning? Well, it certainly is a popular technique. I think it is as an instructional designer. I like it from the standpoint of it's merging more delivery systems. And I think that we have to look at more different ways of delivering information rather than being dependent on one form of delivery. We're usually in education looking for that silver bullet. What is the best way to deliver instruction? And I think what we're finding is that we don't have that. We don't know what is the one best way, that there's probably multiple ways to deliver instruction, and that might be best to capture more learners, to capture more different ways of presenting information. That you really can try and sort of integrate those two things and add some other dimensions to how you're delivering the classroom and give the students some different learning experience. Some people use the hybrid or a blended course as a way for them to get prepared to do an online course, and that can be very effective. And we have found that many times the next generation does like the hybrid or blended learning because they're spending a lot of time using their computer and sort of doing a little bit more independent learning. Now that again, for some people, they don't really want that. They want the social interaction. And so they're better off with a face-to-face classroom. But I like the fact that the hybrid provides a little touch of both. So people that do like to have that independence, but also we know that socialization is really important in education, they also get that chance to come together face-to-face. And Elliot Maslow, I think, has a very good point here, is that when we think of like looking for that one way to deliver instruction, that this idea of us really being a certain kind of learner, and this statement I think is very true. We are naturally really blended learners. What we need to do in our blended classes or our hybrid classes is we need to build in lots of learning activities for those students, and we need to invite them in to gain individual interactions with each other, which can happen a lot in the classroom, and giving them a chance to have that social interaction or personal engagement as we talk about. So I think you can read this. I don't always like to read off the screen, but I think it really does need to become a pedagogical approach, that you look at it about what you're doing and why you're doing it and what the combinations are of those things. Obviously, some people, the online learners, they need to do online because they have no other way of getting into a classroom. So this doesn't work as well for them, but I think when we can, it is a good way to merge our different things. When I talked about that one form of delivery, so what's our biggest one form of delivery that we do most of the time in university settings? Come on. I think we do large classroom lecture, right? This is one of the predominant forms. Was that considered a good delivery method for education? Is that why we did it, because it was a good educational technique? No, it's not. And we know it really isn't the best educational delivery system. So we still do look for different ways. We also know that lecture is very limited, although I'm lecturing to you right now, right? So I think that this particular complement is one of the things we need to look at. You can bring together some of the best practices and applications of both your online and face-to-face teaching. You can merge some of these multiple modes of communication, and the challenge, of course, is where you're going to use them and how you're going to use them. It does integrate these two diverse, unique learning environments. But what the important thing is, there's those bottom 3 points. They need to complement each other. They maybe need to elaborate or extend one another. And that's what is oftentimes missing in some early versions of especially hybrid classes, is that what ends up happening is the classes are not really sort of woven together. They almost become two independent type of classes, and then you sort of have this come together point. And what you really need to look at is the way you're weaving those things to make a unified class. And that becomes a challenge, but one of the primary considerations. And flipped classroom is certainly a form of a hybrid or blended classroom. The distinction to me would be, and I'm not here to do a definitions or a Wikipedia type of thing, but a flipped classroom is really very much on that notion of what Khan's Academy did, where they're doing tons and tons of lecture capture, video type of things, and then you're going back and using that as they come back in the classroom. A true hybrid classroom might use some of that, but it's not dependent on just doing lecture capture, all right? Personally, I think that sometimes when we do video lecture and videotape lectures, we're actually merging two of the worst qualities of those media. We have lecture, which we know isn't necessarily good, and in TV production, we know that talking heads isn't exactly a very good way of presenting information. But it is a way to get your message out there. And so then the key thing to me in developing a hybrid learning class is that your class time, your face-to-face time, becomes what I would call very precious. It's really what you really want to try and figure out what you're going to use there, what's going to be more effective for you and your students. And I think that what I look at when I talk about a weave is that probably that face-to-face class time is one of the first things you want to try and establish, because that becomes almost like your golden thread, if you would. That's your central point, and you're going to have things that are emanating from that. And so one of the things you can do in the face-to-face section, which might be more effective for some of your learners, is that that's a place where you can start reviewing difficult problems, looking at applications, exploring new ideas, forming peer, tutoring groups and collaborations, all right, and definitely dealing with concepts that have been difficult for the students to understand. Some people have been very effective with a hybrid or blended learning experience by posing a question out there during the time that the students are away, so that when they come back into the classroom, they're already getting a gauge of what the students might be having some difficulties with. Does that make sense about the previous content? And one of the biggest notions about a blended learning classroom is this notion of that your classroom does not become the place where you're delivering information. The classroom becomes your laboratory where you're looking at how you can apply that information, how you can experiment with that information, how you can develop more information out of that. So one of the aspects behind all this is that we have more ways than ever before to deliver content. And there's more content out there than anybody could ever possibly assimilate, with web pages being developed and YouTubes and textbooks, all right? And so I don't think that the notion of us having to be the content delivery source is as important as it once maybe was, all right? And by the same token, I think one of the things that we find is that oftentimes we're getting stuck, or we've been in classes, I'm sure many of you have been in classes, I know I have, where my instructor, what they're doing is they're repeating exactly what I just got through reading in the textbook. All right, and they're repeating that same information. So that's not really helping me. They're not necessarily elaborating on it. Or they might not even ever get to the point where I said, yeah, but I really have a problem with 5.4, and I have no idea what they're saying in that section. So, it's important to look at ways we can be more effective with that. And I think that this is a very good quote from Bergman and Sams, who, by the way, are one of the founding people for flipped classrooms, right? Students need their teachers present to answer questions or provide help if they get stuck on an assignment. They don't need their teachers present to listen to a lecture or review content. Not to say that we're not going to use some of that, but we as instructors or teachers, there's a teaching moment which happens to do when we address some of their challenges, right? And help promote further learning. And one of the things that they talk about, and this would be very difficult to see, is that they have 4 factors that they consider to be successful. That the students are getting hands-on experience, all right? That the students are getting social interactions with each other. I don't know if they're always going to have to like each other, but we hope that they might, right? And that it's all about personalizing some instruction for them. When they come into that classroom environment and online, you have a lot of situations where you can be a little bit more individual with that student or help an individual student. And that, of course, we'd like for them to be passionate about their learning, and that has a lot to do with how we construct things, possibly really in that face-to-face section, to make them more engaged and interested in this subject or clarify notions for them. But the fact that it is about the student, how many of you have taught online? Okay, just a few. And I think that sometimes what people say about online learning is that you've lost a lot of contact with your students, which you have, in a sense, of that interpersonal face-to-face. But those of you that have taught online learning know that you also have a lot more different ways to communicate with your students. And you might oftentimes have more ways of communicating with individual students than you may have ever had in a large classroom, right? Through email, through discussions, through other ways that you're doing things, that oftentimes you're actually getting to know your students, and some students especially more, the ones that are able to take advantage of it, right? And we're always going to have reticent students that don't take advantage of it. There's not much we can do about that. So a blended potential for teachers. I think these factors are things to think about. It provides different options and solutions to your course goals or objectives. You can look at ways that you're incorporating independent learning with interactive face-to-face engagement. And realize that when I'm talking about those face-to-face classes, if you listen to sort of some of the tenor or tone that's been going on here, when they come into that classroom, it's not, again, so much about you lecturing them, but maybe you're doing a review about those concepts that they had problems with. But that's where you really want to get them engaged with problems. That's where you want them to get engaged with peer-to-peer tutoring. That's where you want to get them engaged with collaborations with each other, all right? I mean, that's really going to be the important thing up there. And so that you're looking at ways, again, to merge some of your different teaching strategies, all right? What things are going to work online are not going to be the same things that are going to work in a face-to-face classroom. And so that's a challenge. And that's a lot about what I'm talking about here. Developing this kind of class is a challenge. Because I'll tell you that in all the times I've been looking at things, I was hoping that I'd get that little menu that said, these are the things that work best in your face-to-face classroom, these are the best things that work best in your online learning, and these are the ways that you can merge the two, and I haven't found that yet, okay? I haven't found that somebody's actually labeled exactly those activities. So more the notion about the fact that you're getting the students to be engaged with each other, some social interaction on top of their online learning, and having that aspect of applying some of the things that you're doing out there. In the place where this type of thing started, with Khan's Academy and other places, or in science classes, it's a little bit more direct, because in like a Khan's math class, which is where they really started, then the students are not, what they're doing for homework is that they're reviewing lecture materials or readings, all right? What they do for classwork is they actually do that problem solving and the things that used to be assigned as homework. Remember those days when you had your math assignments and you were sent home to figure it out? And you asked mom and dad, and they were like, I don't know what this new math is all about, or I have not a clue what you're doing. And the student's out there floundering with a bunch of math questions, and then they get in the classroom, and that person is lecturing them about the next concept, all right? So really what you're doing is you're flipping it around and saying, I can deliver you some of the key points of content. And now it's content. And now what we're going to do is we're going to look at ways to process that or apply that or play with it, okay? And so then it goes to be a little bit more challenging in certain types of content, but I think you can see where you can look for that. That's what you're looking for. Or at least having those peer-to-peer collaborations. For students, what often happens with them is that they do have extended interactions. They now have interactions that are going on in the classroom. They have interactions that are going on online. They have interactions with discussions. The discussions that are going on online, a lot of things that people also do with that face-to-face component is that those discussions that start online then get debriefed or continued in that face-to-face classroom. A summary of the discussion. I mean, many online discussions, again, those of you who have taught it, we use discussions all the time, but oftentimes those discussions don't come to a culmination, if you would, all right? They're left out there. You post to 2 students, you post an answer to my question, and then we're done, right? And in this sense, we're going to look at a summary of what went on in that discussion and maybe try and sort of come to some conclusions. And of course, the students that are reticent to participate in that live classroom are going to be more apt to participate in the online environment, I'm sorry, guys, I'm getting a little bit of a cold thing going here, and getting a little bit of that going on as they come back in the classroom. So they would be reticent to participate in the classroom, but they're very open to online discussions. And what, again, we're looking at is the ways that we can make more efficient use of our face-to-face classroom. But the research is done shown, and the research is coming from instructors and faculty members, that they report these things. Students learn deeper and had more understanding of the materials. They wrote better papers and produced higher quality projects. They performed better on exams. There were more meaningful discussions on course materials, possibly because discussion becomes a very big part of this classroom. They have a better mastery of concepts and applications, and they seem to develop higher learning skills and critical thinking and problem solving. Now, of course, all of those are based on making sure you're having activities that are addressing those type of things. And there is no blank slate about this, but this is like what a lot of people are reporting, especially the folks that are very interested in the flipped, hybrid, or blended classroom. When you're going to go ahead and look at trying to develop a blended or hybrid classroom, you really need to look at some of these type of considerations, and there's many more. I guess in summary, why? Why and what? Why are you doing blended learning, and what do you think you're going to be able to achieve that's different or better than what you're doing right now? It could be that you're providing more access to students, that's fine. It could be that you believe that you're going to maximize retention because we know that sometimes we don't have as good a retention, or we actually get a lot more sort of students that are leaving in their online classes, and that having that face-to-face component makes them more accountable? Are you trying to improve student learning or provide them with more flexibility? Are you looking at that classroom space and being more efficient for your institution? And are you looking at it as a way to get you prepared to teach online? These are just some, but you really need to go into a blended class experience or a hybrid class experience that you're developing with the notion of like, what am I trying to achieve? How do I feel this is going to do better for my course goals? How is it going to improve learning? Or there may be other aspects. Obviously, we know that one of the biggest aspects about online learning is that it provides extended access to a lot of people that couldn't ever come to the classroom. Or they're working, and this type of thing works well for like a person that is a working parent, you know, and having like has kids at home, and that they can't make it up to the campus as often as they would for a face-to-face. So generally speaking, again, as a model, what we usually sort of start with, just as a starting point, is you might meet on Monday. You'd be online on Monday, you'll meet on Wednesday, and you'll go away again on Friday. You have one period of time where you're meeting face-to-face, 2 periods of time where you're out there in the online environment. Does that make sense? And we have found that to be more successful than some of those earlier notions. We did find some of our classes as we started to look at setting up like what percentages, where really literally they were saying, I'm doing a blended class. My students meet with me for the first 2 weeks, and then I don't see them at all again until the last 2 weeks of the semester. We haven't found that to be very effective. And when you're looking at doing this, of course, there's some basic principles of course design. I don't want to go into this very deep, but you know that there would be. And I think the key one out of this is, of course, you're always, whenever you're taught to instructional designers, what are your learning objectives, right? We're always going to say that. Of course, that is important. But this last 2 points, how are you going to integrate the online and face-to-face portions? And how are you going to make the students accountable for some of their online learning tasks and process? These are both, these are questions, and these are the challenges. So one of the things you want to look at is your course organization. If you look at a map like this, you have readings, video and audio and other media resources. You have discussions, learning activities, papers, projects, and assessments, all right? All of these things could be done online, right? Every single one of these could be done online. And you can use that, you can integrate media into your classroom, you can bring videos into your classroom, in a face-to-face, but they can all be used online. And so what you're wanting to determine is what parts of this are you going to make more part of your online experience as opposed to what you're going to use in your face-to-face. I mean, obviously they can do the readings, obviously you're going to assign learning activities. One of the things that people have seen with the hybrid classes is having the students work on papers and peer reviews or projects that they're starting off online and doing research, and then they're coming together and sort of forming into their groups and discussing and taking that a little further. And so one of the biggest challenges and the most important things is that intertwining of those 2 parts of your class. How do you make the connections between face-to-face and online? And one of the ways to think about that is, again, that face-to-face is a very, very precious part of your instruction. And that's the part of instruction you're probably most used to. And sort of flipping that around, though, now you're not going to be the sage on the stage. You're going to be the helper and assistant to clarify things. And you're going to be promoting groups, and you're going to be helping them go further. But one of the things I think can be a solid sort of concept to think about is that I have a face-to-face section. Let's just say that Wednesday. And then they're going to be going away on Friday. That's going to be my exit strategy. I want you to have an exit plan about what I expect you to be able to be working on and doing. And on the same token, I want you to have an entry plan about what I expect you to have done to get prepared for what I'm going to be doing in my face-to-face classroom, all right? And again, that could be one of the simplest notions, although I'm not a math teacher, would be a math concept where they're looking at problems and they're doing the reading and understand it, and when we come into the classroom, their entry thing is to be able to do that, right? And to solve those problems and do those things. So making sure that you stipulate what is the exit strategy, what are they going to take away from what you did in the face-to-face and maybe continue with that, and then what are they going to be doing and working on to bring into that next portion, which is the face-to-face portion. Does that make sense? I like to look at a little bit of this notion of like a double helix, and that there's a certain notion of a blended classroom that can be very similar to this intertwining of these two events, all right? I look at that outer portion as perchance being like the online, all right? And the online activities are going on out there. And then those little pieces in between the DNA strands, I guess, would be the places that are where we're linking them into our face-to-face. And I think that this sort of concept is helpful about looking at that way of, again, term I use all the time, is that weave. You really want to make those two components weave together. Because again, what happens often is that in these blended classrooms, the students have a very clear idea what they're doing online, but they're not always sure what they're supposed to be doing face-to-face, or vice versa, or they feel that what they're doing online doesn't relate to what they're doing face-to-face. And so you want to make sure you try and do that. The other thing then to consider is that you now have 3 tracks of learning. Normally speaking, we have our, you come to class and you're going to do certain things in class, and then I'm going to give you homework assignments, standard homework assignments, okay? But now in this, you have face-to-face class instruction activities. You have the regular student assignments, right? Just like you would in your classroom. They have to read this book. They have to do these things, all right? But the third track is that the students have to figure out that they're going to be doing more. There's going to be more responsibility on the students to do more learning. Think about it. They are now going to have to supplement on their own that classroom instruction, all right? They've lost 2/3 of the time that they might have been in a classroom if we're doing that 1 time a week, right? And so they've still got like 6 hours or so of like sort of instruction that they need to be exposed to. And they're going to have to take on that responsibility. Very difficult for some students to understand that. And they feel that they're taking a hybrid class because it's going to be easier and they're going to be able to cut corners. And those of you that have taught online know that some online students think the same thing and find out to their dismay, not so much so, right? And in this sense, they're going to have to take on more, all right? They're going to have to take on more work. And you're going to find them balking at that, but I don't know what the sort of rubric is here at UW, but in most places, it's like if I'm taking 3 credit hours of instruction, then I'm responsible in many institutions for 9 hours outside of class, or at least 6 hours outside of class, right? If I'm taking 3 credits, I'm responsible for at least, another 6 hours outside of the classroom. Now, these guys have also lost 2 days of your face-to-face instruction. So that's going to be the thing that you're also going to have to help guide them for and get them prepared that they've got to take on that responsibility. And so again, when we look at some of the models for this, you have your face-to-face classroom. You look at those exit online activities. Then you look at the online instruction component of that, their readings and discussion. And then you look at maybe they're doing some online independent studies and learning tasks and assignments, or research or preparation for their projects, or working on a paper. And that's their entry thing coming back in to another face-to-face classroom. And this kind of concept of making sure that they've got that is very key. And I think this notion of exit and entry assignments can be very helpful when you're trying to sort of construct what it is you're trying to do. The other thing is how do you sort of arrange some of these? And this slide, unfortunately, I'm sorry, the colors does not work out very well, but oftentimes people are using a Venn diagram like this so that you can look at what the different components are and decide what you might be having them do online or face-to-face. And then the area in between can oftentimes be, a little bit of both, right? And so when you're talking about a guest speaker or face-to-face elements, you have those over on this side. You have module readings, online quizzes, assignments, Dropbox, other kinds of discussions. That's your online component. And then you're looking at an overlap about integrating small group discussions. Where does that happen? How do you get them involved with that? How do you make it connect to what they're doing online? But I think that sometimes this type of grid type of thing, or this kind of Venn diagram, is really pretty essential as you're trying to first time put together an online class. Another thing you might want to consider is a matrix. Many people use a matrix to look at their course objectives and then what they're doing for the assessment, of course. And then they have labeled over here their learning activities that are going to be going on online and how they're going to integrate between the online and class components. And so they have assigned readings as being one of the things in discussions comparing learning theories. And then they come into the classroom and they're doing a classroom discussion of their online readings. And they're extending that discussion that they're doing. They're also starting to get involved with those collaborative projects that they might be being assigned, or working together in groups to do a little peer-to-peer teaching so that they're clarifying each other and helping to learn about what they did. And the peer-to-peer mode of having them do instruction can be very helpful, getting them to have that social experience, but also getting them to understand how to try and process that information. And in peer-to-peer instruction, one of the fallacies of group work has always been that the students that are in groups, and it's a common complaint of the students that are in groups, is like, well, I'm doing all the work and I know all this stuff, so I'm being penalized for being in a group. Well, of course, to a sense they are, and that I can go off on a whole other area because that's one of my areas is group work, and a lot of times it's how we've constructed that group activity. However, research has proven that those same students that think they're not getting anything out of that, they're getting a ton out of that by being a teacher. Think about the first time you ever had to teach a course. You all studied stuff, you all knew things, you had your expertise, and then you come into the classroom and you have to actually teach that or explain that, all right? That's a huge learning experience. And we've taken that away from the students, you know, all the time. And that's probably one of the most key learning experiences you can have. All of you have experienced that, I'm sure, if you think about your first time teaching. It's like, oh, wow, I've got to really do a lot of work now to get this all together. I'm going to look at, like, for one of these is a resource for you. Oregon State University has a really, really great section on blended learning. And they have tons and tons of resources here. And that's Oregon State University. And you can find it pretty easily in their Center for Teaching and Learning. They have a whole range, and I'm not going to go through all their web pages because they have quite a bit. Another one that is a real interesting resource. Those of you who are interested in blending is Oregon State University, University of Central Florida, and University of Milwaukee, or University of Wisconsin at Milwaukee has done a lot of work in this. The University of Wisconsin at Milwaukee has done a lot of it because they're one of the few schools in the Wisconsin system that's really in a big urban environment, all right? And they've had many challenges with working parents, single parent working and having to not being able to come to classes all the time. Central Florida also has a lot of things about your blended learning toolkit, and this goes on to a number of different things that I would encourage you that are interested in this to look at. They have a lot of information that's going to be very helpful. Another kind of mix map, to take off from the one before, is that this is a really good way of sort of integrating those different concepts. And maybe if I can shrink this a little bit now. Okay. So what they've done here is they have their face-to-face, they have their online, all right? And you'll see that these arrows are connecting those two types of things. So they have a weekly reading assignment. Students are prepared to discuss this as they come back into the classroom. Classroom discussion to clarify and extend the content. Instructor may be modeling or elaborating and going on to other things. Demonstrate application of the content, and then the students go back out to an online discussion and related assignments, and maybe a team training project, all right? Again, identify group members, introduce training assignments. That's a plan for them, hopefully, to build trust. And then in the online classroom, they're going to meet and organize other ways that they can connect with each other online. Discussions, right? Emails. Those of you that work with group work, one of the things is that most students don't like group work, right? I think it's because they've had a lot of bad group work experiences. Especially online learners don't like it because they felt like, I'm taking an online class so I don't have to talk to anybody, all right? But we know that really having some of that is one of the best practices for online learning, that they should have some kind of group work, all right? And the other thing then that happens with online learners, now of course if they're a dispersed population, like we all think we're going to really have, like from all over the world, then that becomes a lot more difficult. But most of those students are going to be like, I don't know, how can I possibly meet with my group, right? How many of you had to do group work in grad school? Okay. Do you remember how challenging it was and that you had to meet at Perkins at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and that there was no cell phone and there was no text message and that there was no email, and that if you didn't show up at Perkins at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you missed your group work, right? And these students say, I don't know how I'm supposed to possibly be able to interact with my group. They have more ways to be connected with each other than we've ever had before. And quite frankly, they usually use those, right? You know, I thought when I bought my cell phone, I bought it for my kids, that I was buying a phone. You know, maybe a camera. It's a text machine and a computer right now, right? But I can't even get my kids to talk on this, all right? It has to be through Facebook and it has to be through a text. And so I'm just saying that they have tons of other ways that they're communicating with each other. And so they can do a lot of group work online and away from each other. Because really, those other days were really pretty gruesome. And we'd always end up being at a Perkins waiting for that fourth group member who decided never to show up. But because we didn't have a cell phone, they couldn't tell us, right? But I think that this kind of matrix is very, very helpful as you're looking at ways to design your exit and entry activities or your online versus your face-to-face. So the face-to-face activities and content in your class, some of the considerations are, again, this is repetitious, but you know, we want to look at the most difficult and challenging concepts and activities. Things that they might need immediate feedback for or that they're struggling with, and you can sort of tell from maybe some of the activities you're asking them to do online. You can look at having field or class experiences that are extending that further, and maybe you're leading them in a video or exploration of something and discussing how that relates to what you had them read. I think the biggest thing about the big shift with the blended or hybrid classroom is, again, you're not up there as a sage on the stage. Your responsibility isn't so much for delivering the information anymore. It's for helping the students process that information and apply that information. So again, labs, group work, problems, or case-based learning can be very, very good activities to look in your face-to-face section and help them extend and work through those things. Aaron Sams is another guru of flipped classrooms and has a lot of interesting things to say. I'm not going to necessarily go to that link right now. Online activities can be the things that we've already discussed too. They can be doing readings, they can be looking at videos, they can be looking at audio clips, they can be experiencing simulations, they can be doing discussions. They can be doing a lot of writing. They can be doing reflection papers that they're bringing into that face-to-face classroom, which can be a good way to show that they're processing some of the information. They can be doing their research and doing their project preparations. And they can get prepared for interactions with the content, you know, through a number of learning activities that we assign. And then again, this idea of one of the things a lot of people have found to be very effective is generating some web-based questions for that students. So when they come into your face-to-face section, you have some pretty good ideas where some of the struggles or misconceptions are, right? Because oftentimes we assume we know. And that's where we're lecturing about all this other stuff, and this person in the back room is going, I got that. What I didn't get was this. Anybody have any comments or questions about this? Online LMS technologies, of course, can be very helpful as we're extending the classroom. That's what we're really doing. We're extending the face-to-face classroom with a heavy online component. And obviously, they can do all of these things online, right? They don't have to do all this in the classroom. We don't have to be responsible for all that. If you're looking at a redesign, one of the things that people really get hung up on is that they don't know what they have. Oftentimes, what I tell people is, let's talk about what you do have. Your glass is probably way more than half full if you really think about it. And what you're really trying to do with your blended or hybrid class is not so much about new materials, maybe a little bit of change in learning activities, but that you really do have a lot of the information that you need. Mostly what you're looking at is how am I going to change certain portions of that into a different form of delivery, all right? And how am I going to make it so I'm not up there doing all the lecture like I'm doing again right now? I know everybody here is probably very familiar with all the studies that have been done about lecture and how effective, it is or is not, right? What's the average attention span, which of course I've gone way past with all of you right now. What's the average attention span for most people? Come on, somebody, huh? 25 minutes? Oh, we'd be lucky if it was 25 minutes. Anybody else? What's that? 7 to 10. That's right. That'd be closer. And it's diminishing. I think that's what the studies are showing every year. Does anybody that's done any of this, does anybody else have any other comments or things that they'd like to add or any questions? Because I'm pretty much done with my lecture. And now is a part to get you guys to do your collaborations. If not, I know we're getting ready for lunch and you're probably ready for a break, so we can do that too. But I do think that blended learning can be a huge, or hybrid, can be a really interesting way to deliver instruction. And I think it can be, it's been proven recently, and I didn't put that in this slide because there's been a couple of recent pieces of research that show that this particular form of learning is perhaps the most effective. When they compare face-to-face to online, and then they look at blended, there's been quite a few studies that are showing that this is better, all right? Now, of course, anybody that's looked at those studies are really kind of difficult because there's so many variables in what we're talking about with courses and instruction, all right? And so that's always been a problem when you compare online learning to face-to-face, or you compare any of these things to each other. And I always take them with a little grain of salt. However, some of the research is showing that because this merges, and I know it's the term now that people are also having opinions about whether or not that's true or not, I still sort of have a tendency to think that there are learning styles out there and that these will match to more learning styles. But beyond learning styles, I think what everybody has is that we need to get information in a number of different ways. The more different ways that we're able to process or receive or get information, the more increased our retention and learning really is. That's been proven, all right? We end up receiving information through different nodes and parts of our brain, and cognitively, when we have more of those nodes, they make associations to each other, and they strengthen the information. What does that mean? If I see it, feel it, touch it, almost an old Chinese proverb, I have more ways of knowing that. If I see some certain things and experience them online, certain things in my peer-to-peer groups, certain things through a video, certain things through graphics, all right, I have a much more robust knowledge, and I have a much more robust memory of that and much more robust understanding. I thank you all for your time, and I hope you have a wonderful lunch, and thank you very much.